Let's give a big round, a big applause to Nina.
Hi, so I could talk, like this was difficult for me to put together because I could talk to you for a week about this stuff. So I tried to narrow in on something, but if later you want to talk deep about any of this, just please come find me. Just so I have an idea of who I'm talking to, how many of you identify as creative technologists? Okay. What about clothing or fashion designers? Nice. And how about have used or played with conductive thread? Okay, okay. Great. No, this is good. I wasn't sure how technical to get it. It's not that technical. So, so hi, I'm Nina. I work on interaction design for physical things, spaces with other people, and those nouns of what those things are change all the time. And so one of the things I've spent a lot of years working on are interactive textiles. There's a lot of different names people call them. I'm calling it responsive clothing here. And I thought I'd just kind of use this time to muse on things I've been thinking about since I moved from a creative technologist, kind of art experimentation context, to producing this and designing for this at scale. And when I'm talking about responsive clothing, I'm talking about soft garments. I know a lot of people do 3D printed stuff that's responsive, but I really like natural, comforting feel of soft things. And so I think many of you who play with this stuff already know that what I'm talking about is conductive thread that you can weave into your clothes and connect to a power source like a battery pack, and connect to sensors that can connect to things like LEDs or motors or whatever your heart desires. You're weaving in interactivity and the web directly into your clothing, and that gives you more chances and opportunities for self-expression, but also for the socialization of technology. Not always having to have screens in your face, because you have clothes you can touch that can reach the web. Conductive threads have been around forever. There's reports of 18th century, whatever, even before that, people weaving in gold threads into their clothing. So it's been around forever, and so one of the issues has been that you'd have to do all of this by hand. And so I've been thinking about that time that I spent doing this in a creative technology context is kind of like couture. You do these decorative displays. They're kind of one-off. Usually only one or maybe a couple people can actually wear them. They're handmade. If you think about it, runways are basically peer review, and that's what we're doing when we do our performances for this stuff. It's peer review. And so we're making these decorative one-off things because you have to do it by hand. The threads I was talking about there, the conductive threads, you want to be very careful and not put them through a sewing machine because, they can break, they can stretch, and then that can cause the circuit to break. And so that's why you're sitting there and doing this stuff by hand. And the other thing I kind of liken to our kind of art context as couture is basically wearable art. It's seen that way, and it's often very theatrical. I think that's how we use it. So that's certainly what we were doing in the early 2000s under one of my mentors, Xia Xinwei at Georgia Tech at the Topological Media Lab. So this was before iPhones existed, and so we did not document anything we were doing, which is so painful. And so the images you will see are like not the best quality, and there's what some of my colleagues and I could like get together from things that happened like maybe right after I left or right before, but it pains me that we didn't document that well. So, but anyway, just in case you recognize anything or happen to be from Sponge and Foam, this was a predecessor to stuff we worked on. So I look at this stuff we're working on, and it really was wearable art. And we were creating these costumes that would influence you just in their shape to move a certain way. And that would modulate the environment around you. It would, create sound, video. We were synthesizing in real time, lights. You would also be playing with other people who enter the space. And we were really looking at computers as an expressive medium, which I think is super suitable because I believe clothes are a very expressive medium, and I feel very passionate about this because in working on responsive textiles in engineering contexts, the clothing is often seen as a utility, and I find myself explaining to people like, yeah, okay, you had to wear a shirt and pants because you probably get arrested if you didn't, fine, great, but you picked that certain shirt, those certain shoes, those certain pants in your closet because you wanted to present yourself a certain way today. Like, it's really about expression. You have more than one shirt. You chose that to express yourself a certain way, represent yourself a certain way. Sometimes it's about moving a certain way. You have like long, fluid clothing. It kind of makes you walk different compared to when you have the tight kind of precision clothing, right? So I believe clothing is an expressive medium as well. So this all made a lot of sense. Blurry images. So what we were doing is, I'll just back up. I was doing the sound programming and sound design. So in this one thing we called Tea Garden, we were basically like instrumenting clothing to not only modulate video and sound, but synthesize it and create it in real time based on gesture and movement. So it wasn't like you were doing one thing and it was just triggering sound. You were fluidly and constantly creating and writing, which meant we had a ton of wireless sensors embedded strategically all over that was reporting back to a machine that was processing. We're processing in real time with these little microprocessors on you, and it was all very processing intensive. So we were really pushing the limits of what a kind of like on-body processing you could do. I found some of my Max patches. So this is just one of them, just for audio level. So you can see here we had 3 different things going on just to modulate audio level. It had to do with proximity, touch, character, and so that alone, audio level had so much going on. So we were really pushing like what you could do. And what was awesome about that was we could start with social practices of body ornamentation and play instead of devices, which was so great. And I'll explain why in a second, but we have video of this, but this was so fun to watch, like the model realizing she was conducting the sound and just kind of like starting to play. So what I feel is so great about this is you don't shake hands the same way every time. You don't, like all these gestures I'm doing, I don't do that the same way every time. You don't approach people and objects the same way every time. And that's why it was so great that we were able to, using all that on-body processing, write gestures. Because movement is like language. It's very, very fluid. And you need to allow it to be able to evolve, and that's what we were doing with these boring technical state machines in the background, where we were allowing movement to evolve and mean different things as well. Real life is improv, right? And so, our computation became a design choice. So we weren't detecting gestures, we were tracking movement. in contrast, you learn the right way to touch iPhones, to use your Xbox camera. This is one of the many charts like this I found on the internet explaining to people like different touch gestures and how to use them. I always, side note, having had to make these, I always find the different hands interesting, and they look like udders, these hands. These like, so I think of them as udder charts, of just teaching people these very, very specific, and as natural as a designer might try to make them, they're still commands, like saying, hey, Fido, right? It's something that once learned becomes novelty. The other thing about working in our kind of couture art context was the reality of what things look like actually underneath. They're not really very wearable. You feel, that the sensors are really exposed, they're heavy. That circuit's not very comfortable. It's not durable. It's like, treat them like you would your normal clothes, which, if in honesty, you probably just like throw on your bed or on your floor, right? And you can't wash that. You can't run that through a washer. You could, it probably wouldn't go well. And hopefully no one in here worked on this. The other thing about the context is of working in this kind of creative technology space is aesthetics. So I feel like we see a lot of stuff in this maker space, maker fair, where it's like, put an LED on it. And I think that's what a lot of us are doing. So we aren't starting with an expertise of fashion and skilled expertise there. It's more of this like technology rules, and then you kind of get this stuff that's maybe a little tacky, right? I had worked on that in the early 2000s. Nothing was happening in the States really regarding responsive clothing. Whenever I would look into doing anything with innovation in clothing, it's always about performance and weather. So it's like, make it more rainproof, make it more stretch, which is great, but I was really interested in furthering all these other things. The only thing I could ever find that was happening was in Berlin. I don't know, Berlin was like always doing really cool art things with clothing, but so I had like resigned myself to, I'll just have to do one off for Beyonce or Bjork, not that they were asking me, but I'd have to do like, tailor-made responsive clothing for them. But unfortunately for them, I met Ivan Poparev by chance, who happened to be working on this really cool project that Google was trying to do called Jacquard. And the goal here was that we were going to try to make interactive clothing at scale. Make clothes that's actually manufacturable. But Ivan had a really good philosophy, which was Google doesn't make clothes. We should not try to make clothes. If we try to make clothes, you might end up with that fur light thing, right? We should make tools for people that actually make clothes that they don't have to think about the technology. It's just easy for them to embed and further what they believe their garment should be. And so I think the team, they first started with talking to people who really, really know their craft. And so I'm probably going to say this wrong, so you guys can correct me, because I think there's a lot of London people here. So in central London, there's a street called Savile Row. Did I say it right? Savile Row. Which I know I always say it wrong, is known for its like bespoke tailoring for men. And so one of the first things we did was like to go there and give them technology and be like, like how can we make this a kit or something that you can actually use? And I'll just show you this video real quick. Let's hope this works.
In tailoring, we use methods that have been used and not changed for 200 years. So when something new comes along, is really exciting. What's amazing about the project is that I don't have to have any knowledge about the electronics and how it works. So let's see what we can create.
So he says exciting, which is really cool, but I don't know how many of them actually felt when just in my experience, have gone to brands of fashion designers and said, "Here's technology." It's actually quite a process to work with them because we're trying to bridge these different realms, and so a lot of the work that we end up doing with, or I can even say personally, I end up doing with fashion brands or tailors is relationship, which takes a long time for them to build trust in what you're trying to do. Like, number one, clothing, that is so traditional and entrenched. These processes have been built up, and you can't just go in and be like, I'm going to change your factory process. Like that, you can't do that. So they have all of that established that you can't mess with, and then a lot of them already have established brands that you as a technologist you're not going to come mess with what their brand is. And so it's kind of ends up being this education process for both, where they teach you about the brand and what it means, and then you try to show them what could be. And in a lot of these, I end up making these pitches, which probably, again, look like put an LED on it to them. I can kind of tell they're always like, oh, we'd never do that. But we have to kind of give them some ideas, because that's where it's hard. It's been hard to kind of get. It takes a little workshopping to get them to think in that space of like, okay, now technology can take your stuff further. What could it do? Once they're there, it's great, but that's a process. I really enjoy working with like high fashion, because I think that couture element gives people that space for that kind of imagination a little bit more than ready to wear. So, yeah, this was our goal, was to find a way to mass manufacture and not require a brand to change their process, change anything about their manufacturing. Maybe it will load. That's the same thing. And we could just easily slip in there. I'll just skip this if it will let me. So going back to who you work with here. So our idea, we talked to the tailors, and then we realized if we want to do mass manufacturing, let's get to the brands that everyone buys, and find brands that have street cred. Google does not have street cred in making clothes, right? So literal and figuratively street cred here. Levi's happens to be in the same city we are, which made it a lot easier to harass them over and over for them to work with us. They were pretty skeptical, and it took some convincing. One thing that they tried to scare us with is to show us these videos on what it takes to make denim. Have you guys ever seen, I didn't know anything about this until I started working on this stuff. So here's an example of what happens. This is just regular textile manufacturing. They stretch the material, they burn it, they're putting it through terrible things. And so as Levi's was showing this to the team, they're staring at the team's faces to be like, yeah, you're gonna make clothing? You're gonna get your threads through this? And so our team, being a lot of just engineers, was like, well, that's a problem, and that'll be a fun problem to solve. And we did it. And unfortunately, I can't share with you the exact, ways we did it, but maybe I can turn it down a little, because that's our secret sauce. But we've managed to find a way to craft threads that could make it through all of that. These are conductive threads, are essentially threads that are somehow intertwined with metal. And then we were also able to get it through washing machines. And you'll see here, we spent a lot a lot of time testing things in industrial strength washing machines that normal people don't even have, just to make sure it could get through. Of course, the dryer is actually the worst thing than a washer, but you shouldn't be putting your denim through a dryer anyway, by the way. So, and we created not only one type of this thread or this yarn, but various different styles, so people could use it any way they want. And so we felt like, wow, we cracked denim. That's the hardest thing to crack. Like, we're ready for anything. And so the next conversation was, okay, Levi's. After they were like, okay, fine, you can make thread that can get through this. What should we make together? And Levi's is it's a legacy brand. It's been around since the 1800s. You're not going to come in and disrupt it with your Google. So what made more sense was that let's look at one of their lines and at their suggestion that is newer and where they put a lot of their innovation, which was their commuter line. It's basically their performance line that came born out of the cycling community and culture of needing durability, stretch, performance fabrics. So this was a good chance for us to toy with some innovation. Then we start to see things start to narrow in differently than the art context. So we weren't going to be able, it seems, to put thread all over this thing for many reasons. One of them being the ease of manufacturing, and if we were going to stay in their manufacturing process, we needed to take a part that could be dealt with and then sewn back in. So what are those parts? And that part also had to be rigid enough to hold, rigid enough for the touch, and you'll see why, and to hold the thread, and also be somewhere that is natural to touch. There's a lot of places that are kind of unacceptable in public to just be like touching yourself. So we had a few different places we could look at. You know, the collar is rigid, the kind of thing on your pocket, cuff, that part of your jacket that runs down, and it made most sense in the end to be somewhere more easily accessible, natural to touch, and had kind of a wide area. And that's how we ended up narrowing down our interactivity to a cuff. And then that meant I had to make an udder chart. Because now that you've narrowed down all this interactivity to one area, that you're no longer, your movement is no longer a language. It's more in that gestural place. And we're not able to push the on-body processing like before because we can't wire you with sensors because, again, you can't watch that. So that meant teaching people gestures. And we also wanted these what ended up being controls to be very deliberate because you're controlling things and you want to make sure you're doing like a gesture that you won't normally do to trigger these things. We did use machine learning, the hot buzzword of the time, to teach algorithms various ways people touch. So we just had like tons of different people of all different stripes do these gestures, and then had the algorithm help us kind of find the medium so that we weren't, because originally we were just training them on this one guy named David on our team, and so David could like, whenever he would touch it would go great, but anyone else it wouldn't, so we had to kind of learn that variety of ways people touch. Yeah, we took out like all the sensors, but we still needed to have something to power it and to speak to some kind of processing. And so we did what I think a lot of people think about, which is making something that snaps. And so we designed a button, and we worked with Levi's to try to make that snap as close to one of their buttons as possible. And I'll show you in a moment, this snap has the battery, as well as a few other things like accelerometer, a little motor, the lights. What am I missing? Oh yeah, and Bluetooth to your phone. And so we're pushing off a lot of the stuff that would have been on your body, all these sensors, to your phone, to then talk to the cloud and do things. So yes, we don't have sensors all over you, but we do have something you always happen to have with you anyway, and we just leverage that. The team spent a ton of time talking to the community. There was a really strong commuter line community, just because the biking community, especially in the US, I feel like biking, we can talk more about this later, but like biking is just a thing you do everywhere else, but biking was just like this very like community thing in the US for a while. There's this whole fixie culture, and the commuter line was born out of that. And so we were able to meet with them and try to understand their needs. And Levi's had a few different things. They had pants for commuter line that had really great stretch and were you could fold up so it wouldn't get caught in your bike, and the under had like reflective stuff on it so you could see. They had jackets. And so after talking to people and realizing like what their needs were, which had a lot to do with those kinds of things, like being reflective and being seen, we found that they wanted to basically stay in touch and connected without being distracted. That was a lot about what they talk about. So this person talks about their phone being a distraction, but the next thing they said was, I feel like an idiot every time I pull out my phone while I'm riding, yet I do it 2 or 3 times a day. Like, they're doing it anyway. They feel bad about it. So they're either doing it on their bike or it's just cumbersome. It's just cumbersome to be walking in a city and, it's busy and it's not just biking. You're, going to the bus or the train and you have all this stuff and you have to keep pulling out your phone. I know a lot of us end up just keeping it in our hand, and you kind of can't stay in the moment because you're just like always having to check things. And this wasn't the only context that this became interesting. It also came up as far as this kind of context. So people just being able to be present with each other. So, you go to a cafe, you've seen someone you haven't seen, you're meeting someone you haven't seen for a long time. You might be waiting for a phone call. You keep your phone on the table, which is just so rude. So Sherry Turkle has done this really great research about this, about the elsewheres that phones represent. Are you guys familiar with this? So when a phone is present, like you're kind of, you're symbolizing and you're also feeling that there are all these elsewheres you could be. And so your attention is not with that person. And she even tested turning the phone over so the screen wasn't showing, and it still had that same effect. And so we were thinking about how can that being in the moment be something we could help with in this case too, of people just wanting to be there, still be connected if they need to know that like, oh, that important call has come in, but be present and attentive with the people that they're actually with. I will show you kind of where we ended up. And what I'll just explain here is what we've talked about is very much about utility now rather than expression. And I just wonder, I'm going to take this out, why we keep coming back to utility. In this case, it made sense because it furthers the story of the garment, and I feel passionately about that. And I'll explain how. Hopefully this is all going to work. Demos are, demos. Okay. So, Brian, I may need you to be my assistant. Okay, so, does this work? Yes. Yay! Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so this, first and foremost, is a cute jacket. That's like when anyone puts it on, that's what you're looking at. You shouldn't be like, oh, I'm wearing a tag. Like I just have a cute jacket, no matter what. That's what matters. And I will say, whenever people do put it on, they do kind of look a little cuter. So the story of the garment, right, with its function. So it has stretch, so you can kind of see if I do that. It has a longer tail in the back, so that when you're riding, you're not kind of like showing all your stuff. It has, I don't know if you can see it, like these kind of tasteful reflective elements on it. So they're not like giant bands, but they're kind of tasteful and you can still see them. It has a ton of pockets inside and out. Oh, it has these storm cups so that when you're riding, or even when you're commuting, the air doesn't go through and make you cold. So it has all these things that are really great for commuting and is a purpose, right? And so that's hopefully what we were extending when you turn on Jacquard. So these are the threads right here. And we could make them totally invisible, but when we did that, people didn't know where to touch. So we used basically what's a mistake in sewing to kind of to skip a skip area so that you kind of got an idea. Oh, that feels so bad. Maybe we can put it in here so you don't have to stand. I feel terrible. Okay.
I get a closer view than anybody.
Okay. So, this is the tag, and we can talk about it more later. It doesn't have to look like this. In fact, that's all you need. Yes, I have a lot to share about that. But in this case, it looks like this. And so the idea was kind of like those straps that are on your trench coats and such. So you just tighten it in and snap, and Jacquard is on. And now, I'm going to go here to my tab and show you guys some stuff. Okay. So the threads are active, and so you can, I don't know if you can kind of see this, and they're pressure sensitive. So this I'm just kind of doing that, but if I do this, it knows, and so that's an element that we can play with. Great. All right, now.
That just say touch yourself. I don't know.
I wrote that. Touch your cuff. Cuff. This is another thing I could do like an hour-long thing on, was just the onboarding people to the idea of touching your clothes. We spent a lot of time on that because it looks really natural, but I think we nailed it in the end. But yeah, let's talk about that later. That's a whole other thing. So now I don't have to look at this anymore. I put this in my pocket, and my volume's up enough, and I can go along about my day, and I can be like, oh, okay, I want to listen to some music. Just make sure this is turned up, because I think I turned it down. Volume up. Okay. Maybe it's just a song. Leave it out. Better. Yeah, I'm not really feeling this song. What do you think? Let's try another song. Okay, yeah. Okay, we're going. This might be too party. I'm gonna get distracted. Okay, sorry. Okay. So I'm always late, and so I need to know, like, while I'm walking, just like, how long is it going to take me there? I do this constantly on my way to work, as if checking it is going to make like the time make it any better. But anyway, so I'm just going to check how long it's going to take me to walk back to my hotel really quick.
Getting location.
Let me just see if that GPS is going to work.
This is the problem with iPhone.
Yeah, and usually doesn't take this long.
2 minutes.
Yeah, let me make sure she'll come out locations on. She'll eventually talk, but usually she doesn't. She's in a different
We're
country.
9 minutes away and we'll reach your destination by 12:04 p.m.
Great. Okay. So usually that's pretty instant. I think she had to just get used to where she is.
You are 9
Yeah.
minutes away and we'll reach your destination by 12:04 p.m.
Great. Okay. So now that's pretty much all I need for my commute. Again, another hour-long talk is how we decided that we would what the right thing to do was to allow people to customize what their clothing would do. Otherwise, they kind of had a one-trick thing, and everyone had different needs. And so we designed it so that you can very easily just tap on a gesture and literally put what we call an ability on it. I'm just going to change this ability right here to tell me what music I'm playing. And so some of the other things, like I just didn't happen to get a phone call or a text while we were talking, but those can come through right here, and I can know just by a little vibration. One thing I find really useful is back home I end up using a lot of lifts. It's kind of like Uber, and so I found myself like always like watching the phone at the end to see like, are they here yet? When I'm still with my friends, and that's not cool. So I had to design an ability so that this will just tell me when the lift is here, and I don't have to stare at my phone. It's like, oh, it's here, great, I can go. So I'm just going to show you another. So I'm playing my music, and like, you're listening to Spotify, and you don't always know what's playing on Spotify. So one of the abilities that we created is what's playing. So. Oh, okay, good. And then, yeah, I heard it, but then it saves it here in the app too. And then another really cool thing that we have in here that I can't show you because we have to be out in the wild, but you know how you're a lot of times just passing by new cool places and you want to remember to come, like go there again. And so you can just be walking along and just kind of drop a pin, and it'll be saved as something for you later to like, oh, there's a restaurant I wanted to go to, where are all the places? So that's the jacket. And the best part is, and there's a lot more you can do, like as far as assigning that we can show you, but those are some of the top things people love to do, is have their music on and directions. But the best part is, you can just wear it as a jacket, and when you're done, you can just unsnap this thing, plug it into USB, and charge. And that makes it washable. That's it. And you just have this little guy here to snap it in, but you can go in the washer.
In the dryer. Not denim.
No, you should not put your denim in the dryer. In general, it'll make it fade. So it's going to transition. And so we're really proud that we made something that was durable, washable, wearable, and aesthetically, it wasn't put an LED on it. It was, we kind of did, but GQ was like, finally, a piece of wearable tech that looks wearable. Another thing we can talk about later is my feelings about that phrase, wearable tech. But I'm super proud of this, but what I'm really looking forward to is when we bridge this world and what we've been working on for so long in that art world and couture world of starting with social practice and being in that, the idea that language is improv and written, and how can we just be out of that world of gestures and be more expressive and responsive. I'm easy to find on the internet. Thank you so much.